Caleb Weston stood at the edge of the cliff, his father's gold signet ring clutched in his trembling hand. One throw, and he could bury his name forever. Behind him lay 10,000 acres of Texas land, a fortune most men would kill for. But none of it could fill the hole Margaret Collins had torn through his chest when she laughed about his calloused hands to her lover. Tonight, Caleb would become nobody. Tonight, he would walk into the workers' quarters and discover if any woman in this world could love a man with nothing but his soul. If you want to follow Caleb's journey to the end, subscribe to our channel now and comment the city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The letter hit the mahogany desk with a sound that seemed too soft for the destruction it carried. Caleb Weston didn't move. He just stared at his brother's handwriting, the words burning themselves into his memory like a brand on cattle hide. "You ain't reading it again." His younger sister, Ruth, stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I watched you read that thing 6 times already." 7. Caleb's voice came out flat. "Wade Hollister wants an answer by Sunday." "And what answer you gonna give?" Caleb finally looked up. At 35, he had the kind of face that made women in San Antonio whisper behind their fans. Strong jaw eyes the color of storm clouds, and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the largest ranch in Texas hill country. But right now, those storm cloud eyes held nothing but exhaustion. "George thinks I should marry Amelia." Ruth let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "George thinks you should do whatever fills his pockets fastest. That man's been managing our legal affairs so long, he forgot he ain't the one making decisions around here." "He ain't wrong about the numbers." Caleb pushed back from the desk and walked to the window. The summer sun was brutal today, turning the distant fields into shimmering waves of heat. "Hollister's got water rights we need. His land connects ours to the railroad. Marriage would double what Pa left us." "Pa also left you a brain." Ruth moved closer. "Use it. That girl Amelia got about as much warmth as a rattlesnake in January. You really want to wake up next to that for the rest of your days?" Caleb's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, pressing against the spot where the old wound still throbbed. Ruth's voice softened. "This is about Margaret, ain't it?" The name hit him like a physical blow. 2 years and it still had that power. "Don't." "Caleb." "I said don't." He turned from the window, and for a moment the mask slipped. Ruth saw the raw pain underneath the kind that didn't fade with time. Margaret made her position real clear. "I'm a brute. A man who smells like dirt and horses. Good enough to fund her fancy life, but not good enough to actually love." Margaret was a lying, scheming. She was honest. Caleb's laugh held no humor. "That's the hell of it. She was the first woman who was actually honest about what she saw when she looked at me. The land, the cattle, the gold in the bank. That's all any of them see." Ruth stepped forward and grabbed her brother's arm. "That ain't true." "Name one. Name one woman who's come calling at this house who didn't first ask about the acreage. Name one who cared whether I could read poetry or preferred silence. Name one who looked at my hands and saw anything but the wealth they represent." Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it. "That's what I thought." Caleb pulled away gently. "George is right about one thing. I'm 35 years old. If I don't produce an heir, everything Pa built dies with me. The Weston name ends. So you'll marry a woman you don't love. Let her give you children and spend your money while you both pretend this is a life. What choice do I have?" The question hung in the air, heavy as the summer heat. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "There's always a choice, Caleb. You just gotta be brave enough to make it." She left him standing there alone with his thoughts and the letter that demanded an answer he didn't have. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, the finest mattress money could buy, and stared at the ceiling while Margaret's voice echoed in his memory. "He's a brute, Caroline. No refinement whatsoever. Do you know he actually tried to read me poetry last week? Poetry from a man whose hands look like leather and smell of horse sweat. I nearly laughed in his face. Then why marry him? Because, dear sister, once we're wed, I'll have legal claim to a portion of those lands. A year, perhaps two, of enduring his clumsy affections, and then I'll have enough to live the life I actually deserve. Far, far away from a man who thinks a sunset over cattle is romantic. Caleb had stood in that hallway, frozen, his heart crumbling like dry Texas soil. He'd never told anyone exactly what he heard that night. When he broke the engagement, he let the rumors fly. Let Margaret and her family call him unstable, paranoid, unfit for decent company. The truth was too humiliating to speak aloud. A brute. A man no woman could truly love. The words had burrowed into him like parasites, feeding on every doubt he'd ever had about himself. He threw off the covers and walked to the window. The moon hung low over his land, casting silver light across the fields where his workers would be sleeping in their simple quarters. Men and women who woke before dawn, who worked until their bodies screamed, who ate whatever the cook provided and never complained because they had nowhere else to go. They didn't know his face. To them, he was just a name on a paycheck, a shadow in a distant house. Silas Monroe handled everything: the hiring, the firing, the daily operations. Caleb had trusted the foreman because his father had trusted him, and that was how things worked in the West. You inherited loyalty along with the land. But lately the accounts looked wrong. Supplies vanishing, workers leaving without explanation, whispers reaching the main house about conditions that didn't match what Caleb had authorized. He needed to see it for himself. The thought struck him like lightning, sudden and electric. What if he went down there? Not as Caleb Weston, master of 10,000 acres, but as nobody. A drifter looking for work. A man with nothing but the clothes on his back. If there was a woman in this world capable of loving a man for his soul alone, he would find her there. In the dust, in the heat, among people who had no idea who he really was. The idea was madness. George would call it insanity. Ruth would call it foolishness. But as Caleb stood in the moonlight, feeling the weight of his empty future pressing down on him, madness started to look like the only path forward. "You've lost your mind." George Weston paced the study like a caged animal, his lawyer's coat flapping with each sharp turn. At 42, he was 7 years older than Caleb, but looked younger, somehow softer, the result of a life spent with papers instead of horses. Probably. Caleb sat calmly in his chair, already dressed in clothes he'd pulled from the oldest trunk in the storage shed. Worn trousers, a faded shirt, boots with holes threatening at the toes. "But I'm doing it anyway. Do you understand what's at stake?" Wade Hollister is not a patient man. He expects an answer about Amelia by Sunday. If you disappear, tell him I went to handle cattle business in another state. You're good with words, George. Make something up. George stopped pacing and stared at his brother. "And what happens when someone recognizes you? You think those workers are blind. You think Silas Monroe won't. Silas has worked here 11 years. He's seen me maybe a dozen times, always from a distance, always when I was dressed like the owner of this place." Caleb gestured at his current appearance. "You think he'll recognize me looking like this? This is about Margaret, isn't it?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "This is about finding out if there's a single woman alive who can look at a poor man and see something worth loving. There are easier ways to... No." Caleb stood, and for a moment the power that usually hid behind his quiet demeanor flashed through. "There ain't. Every woman who walks through that door sees the Weston fortune first and me second. Every smile, every kind word, every flutter of eyelashes, all of it calculated. All of it bought and paid for before they even open their mouths. And you think you'll find true love in the workers' quarters?" George's voice dripped with disbelief. "Among people who shovel manure and pick vegetables? I think I'll find honesty." Caleb moved toward the door. "Something this house ain't seen in a long time." "Caleb, wait." He paused, hand on the door frame. George's voice softened, just slightly. "How long?" "Long enough to know the truth. About the ranch, about Silas, about whether there's any hope left for me in this world. And if there isn't, If every woman down there is just as calculating as... Then I'll marry Amelia Hollister and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Caleb looked back at his brother. But at least I'll know I tried. Martha Jenkins had been the cook at Lone Star Ranch for 23 years. She'd nursed Caleb through childhood fevers, bandaged his wounds when he fell off horses, and held him when his mother died of scarlet fever. There wasn't much that could shock her anymore. But watching Caleb walk into her kitchen dressed like a vagrant came close. Lord have mercy. She pressed a flour-dusted hand to her chest. What in heaven's name? I need your help, Martha. Boy, you look like something the cat dragged in, chewed up, and spat back out. Good. Caleb's smile was thin but real. That's the idea. He explained his plan while Martha listened with growing horror. By the time he finished, she was gripping her wooden spoon like she wanted to beat some sense into him. This is the foolishest thing you ever dreamed up, Caleb Weston. And I was there when you tried to ride that wild stallion at 16. I know. You could get hurt. Those workers don't play gentle. And Silas? She lowered her voice. That man's got a mean streak wider than the Rio Grande. I seen how he treats folks when he thinks nobody important is watching. That's exactly why I need to go. Martha studied him for a long moment. Her eyes, still sharp despite her 55 years, saw straight through to the broken thing he was trying to hide. This ain't just about the ranch, is it? Caleb didn't answer. That Collins woman done a number on you. Martha shook her head slowly. Made you think you ain't worth loving unless you're pretending to be someone else. I ain't pretending to be someone else. I'm stripping away everything that ain't really me. The money, the land, the name, if what's left ain't enough. He stopped, swallowed hard. Then at least I'll know. Martha moved forward and cupped his face in her weathered hands the way she used to when he was a child, and the world seemed too big and too scary. You listen to me, Caleb Weston. What's left when you take all that away is the best man I ever helped raise. Kind, honest, stubborn as a mule but with a heart bigger than this whole state. She patted his cheek firmly. Any woman who can't see that don't deserve you, rich or poor. Then help me find one who can. Martha sighed the deep sigh of a woman who knew she couldn't stop a force of nature. I'll keep your secret, but you better send word if you need help, and eat properly, you hear? I know what slop they serve in that mess hall. Yes, ma'am. She hugged him, then fierce and quick, and pressed something into his hand, a small leather pouch. Herbs for pain and fever, just in case. She stepped back, eyes shining. Now, get out of my kitchen before I change my mind and tie you to a chair. The walk from the main house to the workers' quarters took almost an hour on foot. Caleb had made this journey dozens of times on horseback, barely noticing the distance. But walking it, feeling every rock through the thin soles of his borrowed boots, watching the sun sink toward the mountains in streaks of orange and violent purple, that was something different entirely. His body ached by the time he reached the cluster of buildings that housed his workers. The smell hit him first. Turned earth, animal sweat, wood smoke, and the sharp tang of bodies that had labored all day under the Texas sun. He'd expected it to be unpleasant. Instead, it smelled like honesty. A few workers glanced at him as he approached, but no one paid much attention. Drifters looking for work weren't unusual this time of year. Ranches needed extra hands for the summer push, and men without homes wandered from property to property, trading their labor for a bed and a meal. Caleb spotted Silas Monroe sitting on a bench near the tool shed, a leather ledger open on his knee. The foreman looked different up close than he did from the windows of the main house, heavier, meaner. His small eyes swept over Caleb with the cold calculation of a man measuring livestock. "Help you?" Caleb kept his eyes down, his voice humble. "Looking for work, sir. Got a letter of recommendation." He handed over the paper George had reluctantly written, introducing Michael Crawford as a reliable hand with experience in fieldwork. Silas barely glanced at it. "We don't pay much. Work starts at 4 in the morning. You slack off, you're gone. Steal anything, and I'll have the sheriff on you before you can blink." "Yes, sir." "Bunkhouse is that way." Silas jerked his thumb toward a long, low building. "Mess hall rings at sundown. Miss it and you don't eat." He turned back to his ledger without another word. Caleb walked toward the bunkhouse, his heart pounding. This was it. He was nobody now. Just another pair of hands, another mouth to feed, another body to work until it couldn't work anymore. The freedom of it was terrifying. The bunkhouse was a single long room lined with canvas cots, most already claimed by sleeping men or men preparing for sleep. The air was thick and hot-heavy with the smell of sweat and the sounds of snoring. Caleb found an empty cot near the back and sat down the canvas, groaning under his weight. His body wanted to collapse, but his mind was too alert, too aware of the strangeness of his situation. Around him, workers whispered to each other in the dimness. "3 cattle missing this week alone. Silas says it's theft, but I ain't seen no proof. Poor Hannah gonna catch hell for it, mark my words." The name caught Caleb's attention. Hannah. He stayed very still, listening. "That girl's got the worst luck I ever seen." The speaker was an old man, a few cots down, his white hair bright in the moonlight from the window. "Comes here thinking she finally found a place, and Silas treats her like she personally insulted his mama. What did you expect? Her daddy was Thomas Pierce. Her daddy was framed, and anyone with sense knows it. Sense don't matter much when the powerful folks say otherwise." The old man made a disgusted sound. "Thomas Pierce was the best driver in 3 counties, honest as the day is long. That cattle-rustling charge was horse crap, and everyone who knew him knew it." Thomas Pierce. The name tugged at something in Caleb's memory. An old document in George's files. A transport contract. Something about cattle and a man named Hollister. He filed it away for later and closed his eyes, letting the conversation wash over him. Tomorrow his new life would begin. Tonight he would rest and try not to think about everything he'd left behind. 4 in the morning came with the violent clang of metal on wood. Caleb jolted awake, his body screaming protests before he even moved. Around him, men groaned and shuffled, pulling on boots and stumbling toward the door, with the automatic movements of people who had done this 1,000 times before. The darkness was still absolute when they reached the fields. Stars blazed overhead, indifferent to the suffering below, and the summer air already held the promise of brutal heat to come. A foreman, not Silas, but a younger man with a permanent scowl, handed out assignments. Caleb was sent to the vegetable fields with a hoe and a quota that seemed impossible. He worked. The sun rose and began its slow assault. By mid-morning, Caleb's hands were bleeding through the thin gloves someone had tossed his way. His back felt like it might snap in half. His throat burned with thirst. He'd thought he understood hard work. He'd spent years alongside his ranch hands, helping with roundups, repairing fences, doing the physical labor that kept a property running. But this was different. This was work without rest, without water breaks when you needed them, without the knowledge that you could stop whenever you chose. This was the reality he'd been blind to. The other workers moved around him like ghosts, efficient and silent. They didn't talk much, didn't waste energy on anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. When someone stumbled, nobody stopped to help. When someone fell behind, they caught up on their own, or faced Silas's wrath. It was nearly noon when Caleb's vision started to blur. The heat was a physical weight now pressing down on him from every direction. His arms felt like lead. His legs trembled with every step. He leaned on his hoe, gasping for breath, and watched the world spin around him. "Get up," he told himself. "Get up, you damn fool. You wanted to know what it felt like. Now you know." But his body wouldn't obey. He sank to one knee, then the other. The earth was burning hot through his worn trousers, but he couldn't find the strength to stand. Workers passed him without glancing down. A few stepped deliberately around him, their message clear. You're on your own. Caleb understood. He'd created this system. He'd allowed it to exist. And now he was experiencing exactly what he deserved. Then a shadow fell over him. Drink. The voice was low and firm, belonging to a woman. Caleb lifted his head and saw a tin cup held out toward him, filled with water that caught the sunlight like liquid gold. He looked past the cup to the woman holding it. She was perhaps 28, with hair the color of autumn leaves pulled back in a practical braid. Her face was tanned from years in the sun, and her eyes brown warm, ancient with a sadness that seemed too deep for her. Years studied him without pity or judgment. She wore the same rough clothes as the other workers, faded and patched. Her hands were calloused, her nails short and practical. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. Nothing that would make a man in a San Antonio ballroom look twice. But something about the way she stood there, straight-backed and dignified despite everything, made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. "You gonna drink it or admire it?" she asked. He took the cup and drank. The water was lukewarm and tasted slightly of metal, but it was the sweetest thing he'd ever experienced. "Thank you." His voice came out rough. "You didn't have to." "No," she agreed. "I didn't." She waited while he finished, then took the cup back and tucked it into her apron. For a moment their eyes met, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that had been rusted shut for 2 years. "You're new," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. I ain't nobody's ma'am." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Name's Hannah." "Michael." The false name felt wrong on his tongue. "Michael Crawford." Hannah nodded once, as if filing the information away for later examination. "Word of advice, Michael Crawford. Pace yourself. Texas sun don't care how strong you think you are. It'll kill you just as quick as it'll kill the weakest man here." "I'll remember that." She turned to go, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. "And stay away from Silas. He's been in a mood all week looking for someone to blame for the missing cattle. New faces make easy targets." Before Caleb could respond, she was gone, moving back to her own row with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to survive by never standing still too long. He watched her go, this woman who had stopped when everyone else walked past. This woman who had shared her water with a stranger and asked for nothing in return. Hannah. He didn't know yet that her father's ghost would haunt his family's legacy. He didn't know that her story and his were already intertwined in ways neither of them could imagine. All he knew in that moment was that something had changed. For the first time in 2 years, Caleb Weston felt the faint stirring of hope. That evening in the mess hall, Caleb learned what hope cost. He was sitting alone at the end of a long wooden table, forcing himself to eat the thin soup and hard bread that passed for dinner when Silas Monroe walked in. The foreman's presence changed the air immediately. Conversations died, heads bowed. Workers who had been laughing moments before suddenly became very interested in their food. Silas walked slowly down the center of the hall, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. His eyes swept the room with the lazy menace of a predator choosing his prey. He stopped at Hannah's table. "Pierce." Hannah looked up. Her face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, just a calm blankness that Caleb recognized as a mask. He wore the same one himself when dealing with men who wanted to see him break. "Sir? Heard you were late to your section this morning. 3rd time this week. I was helping Mrs. Patterson with her water bucket. She's got that bad hip and—" "I don't care if she's got a bad hip, a bad back, and a bad attitude." Silas leaned down, his face inches from Hannah's. "When I say work starts at 4, work starts at 4. Not 4:05, not 4:01, 4. "Yes, sir." "Since you can't seem to understand simple instructions, you're docked half rations for the week." Silas smiled a cold slash of a thing. Maybe a little hunger will help you remember. The mess hall was silent. Caleb's hands clenched under the table. Half rations meant Hannah would be working 14-hour days on barely enough food to keep a child alive. In this heat, it was practically a death sentence. He watched Hannah's face, watched her swallow whatever words wanted to escape, watched her nod once and return to her soup as if nothing had happened. Silas lingered, clearly wanting a reaction. When he didn't get one, he made a sound of disgust and moved on. The conversations slowly resumed, but Caleb noticed something. The workers nearest Hannah had shifted slightly away, creating a bubble of empty space around her. Even the woman who had been sitting beside her had moved to another spot. Hannah ate alone. Caleb picked up his bowl and bread and walked over to her table. He sat down across from her without asking permission. Hannah looked up, surprise flickering briefly in her eyes before the mask slammed back into place. "Table's got plenty of other spots, Crawford." "I know. Folks might get the wrong idea you sitting with me." "What idea would that be?" Hannah's laugh was short and bitter. "That you're touched in the head mostly. Nobody sits with the thief's daughter. Your daddy was a thief." The question hung between them. Hannah's eyes searched his face, looking for the mockery or judgment that usually followed this revelation. She found neither. "That's what they say," she finally answered. "Stole cattle from a shipment he was supposed to be delivering. Got caught, sent to prison, died there. End of story." "But you don't believe it." Hannah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was low, meant only for him. "My daddy was the most honest man I ever knew. He couldn't lie to save his life. Used to drive my mama crazy because he'd tell her the truth about her cooking, even when she wanted him to fib." A small smile crossed her face there, and gone like a bird in flight. "He taught me to read when most folks thought girls didn't need such things. Taught me to figure numbers too. Said a woman who couldn't think for herself was a woman who'd spend her whole life at the mercy of men who could." "Sounds like a good man." "He was." Hannah's voice hardened. "He was framed. I know it like I know the sun rises in the east, but knowing a thing and proving it are two different animals." Caleb thought about the documents in George's office. The name Wade Hollister. The transport contracts that had been mysteriously misfiled. What happened to your mama? Hannah's face closed like a door slamming shut. "She died. Year after Daddy. Doctor called it pneumonia, but I know better. She died of grief, of watching everything she loved torn apart by lies." They sat in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by losses they couldn't fully share. "I'm sorry," Caleb finally said. Hannah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "You're different." "Different how?" "Most men hear thief's daughter, and they're gone before I finish the sentence. You're still sitting here." Caleb held her gaze. "I don't judge a horse by its sire. Don't see why I should judge a woman by her father." Something shifted in Hannah's expression. Not trust, it was too soon for that. But maybe the faintest crack in the wall she'd built around herself. "You're gonna regret sitting here, Michael Crawford. Silas has a long memory and a mean streak. He'll make your life hell for associating with me." "Let him try." Hannah shook her head, but Caleb could swear he saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. "Touched in the head. I knew it." She went back to her soup, and Caleb went back to his, and neither of them said another word. But when they left the mess hall that night, walking in opposite directions toward their separate bunkhouses, Caleb glanced back. Hannah was watching him go. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched with those ancient, sad eyes that had seen too much hardship and expected nothing good from the world. Caleb made himself a promise in that moment. Whatever Hannah Pierce needed to believe in again, justice, hope, love, he would find a way to give it to her. Even if it meant revealing everything, even if it meant losing everything. Some things were worth more than a name. The days that followed carved themselves into Caleb's body like knife marks on old leather. He woke before dawn. He worked until his muscles screamed. He ate whatever thin gruel the mess hall provided and collapsed onto his cot each night, wondering how anyone survived this life for years on end. But it wasn't the physical pain that kept him awake. It was Hannah. She moved through his thoughts like water through cracks in stone, finding spaces he'd thought were sealed forever. The way she held her head high when others looked away. The way she worked twice as hard as anyone else, knowing it would never be enough for Silas. The way she'd shared her water with a stranger and asked nothing in return. On the fourth morning, Caleb found himself assigned to the same field section as Hannah. She glanced up when he arrived, her expression unreadable. "You again?" "Seems like it." "Silas put you here on purpose." Hannah's voice was flat. "He's testing you, seeing if you'll run once you realize being near me means being a target. Then he's gonna be disappointed." Hannah studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw made her shake her head slowly. "You're either the bravest man I ever met or the dumbest." "Can't it be both?" A sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, but close enough to make Caleb's chest tighten. They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher. The heat was brutal even for summer in Texas, and by mid-morning, Caleb's shirt was soaked through. But he noticed Hannah's movements growing slower, her face paler beneath the tan. Half rations. 3 days now of barely enough food to keep a bird alive. "When did you last eat something solid?" he asked quietly. Hannah didn't look up. "Mind your own business, Crawford." "I am minding my business. Can't work properly if my partner collapses." "I ain't your partner. I ain't your anything." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of hard bread he'd saved from breakfast. He held it out without a word. Hannah's hands stilled on the plants. She stared at the bread like it might bite her. "Take it," Caleb said. "Why?" "Because you need it." "That ain't a reason. Everybody needs something. Don't mean strangers go around giving it to them." Caleb met her eyes. "Maybe I ain't a stranger anymore." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Hannah reached out and took the bread. She ate it quickly, mechanically, like someone who'd learned not to savor things because they could be taken away at any moment. "Thank you." The words seemed to cost her something. "You're welcome." They went back to work, but something had shifted. The wall between them had developed another crack. That evening, old Ezra Thompson caught Caleb's arm as he headed toward the mess hall. The white-haired worker had been watching Caleb for days now, his ancient eyes missing nothing. "You got a minute, son?" Caleb nodded and followed Ezra behind the tool shed away from listening ears. "You're playing a dangerous game." Ezra's voice was low and gravelly. "Getting close to that girl." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't insult my intelligence, boy. I've been working ranches since before your daddy was born. I know what a man looks like when he's falling for a woman." Ezra's eyes narrowed. "I also know what a man looks like when he's hiding something." Caleb's blood went cold. "I ain't hiding nothing." "Mm-hmm." Ezra didn't sound convinced. "Whatever you say. But let me tell you something about Hannah Pierce. That girl's been through more hell than you can imagine. Lost her daddy to lies, lost her mama to grief, lost her position as a school teacher because small-minded folks couldn't see past a name. I know about her father. You know what people say. You don't know the truth." Ezra leaned closer. "Thomas Pierce was set up. I'd stake my life on it. He found out something he shouldn't have, something about powerful men doing powerful dirty deeds, and they destroyed him for it." Caleb's mind raced. What kind of dirty deeds? Cattle, money, land deals that don't add up. The kind of things men kill for in this territory. Ezra's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Thomas was hauling a shipment for Wade Hollister when it all went wrong. The cattle disappeared, and somehow all the evidence pointed straight at Thomas. Convenient, don't you think? Wade Hollister. The name hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. The same man trying to force him into marriage with his daughter. The same man whose water rights and railroad connections George kept praising. You think Hollister framed him? I think Thomas Pierce found something he wasn't supposed to find, and I think he died before he could tell anyone about it." Ezra straightened up and stepped back. "I also think there's more to you than you're letting on, Michael Crawford. Just hope you're one of the good ones." He walked away before Caleb could respond. The mess hall that night felt different. Every face seemed suspicious. Every whispered conversation seemed loaded with meaning. Caleb sat in his usual spot and watched Silas Monroe hold court at the foreman's table, laughing too loud at his own jokes, while the workers around him smiled with dead eyes. Hannah came in late, moving slowly. The half rations were taking their toll. She got her meager portion and headed for an empty corner, clearly planning to eat alone. Caleb stood up. Several workers noticed. A few exchanged knowing glances. One man muttered something that sounded like "fool" under his breath. Caleb ignored them all and sat down across from Hannah. "You're making a habit of this," she said. "Seems like I am?" "People are talking. Let them talk." Hannah pushed her food around her plate. "Why are you doing this? Really? And don't give me that nonsense about not judging horses by their sires. Nobody's that noble." Caleb considered lying. Considered giving her another easy answer that would keep his secret safe. But something in her eyes, that mixture of hope and fear and desperate need to believe, made the words stick in his throat. "Because I know what it feels like," he said quietly. "To be judged for something you didn't do. To have everyone look at you and see something that ain't real." Hannah's fork stopped moving. "What did people judge you for? Being a brute." The word came out before Caleb could stop it. "Someone I trusted told the world I was nothing but dirt and calluses. Said I wasn't fit for decent company. Said the only thing worth loving about me was—" He stopped himself. He'd almost said too much. "Was what?" Hannah pressed. "Was the things I had, not the man I was." Understanding dawned in Hannah's eyes. The kind of understanding that only comes from shared pain. "A woman," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "She broke your heart." "She broke more than that. She broke my belief that anyone could ever—" Caleb's voice cracked, and he forced himself to stop to breathe. "Never mind. Ancient history." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "My mama used to say that broken things can still be beautiful. That's where the light gets in." Caleb looked up at her, this woman who had every reason to be bitter and hard and closed off from the world. This woman who still found it in herself to offer comfort to a stranger. "Your mama sounds like she was wise." She was. Hannah's smile was sad but real. "She was the wisest person I ever knew, and the kindest. She used to take in stray dogs, stray cats, even a stray goat once. Drove my daddy crazy, all those animals eating us out of house and home. But he let her do it. He loved her. When you love someone, you let them be who they are, even when it's inconvenient." The words settled into Caleb's chest like seeds finding good soil. The next morning, Silas Monroe made his move. The workers were gathered for morning assignments when the foreman strode into the center of the group, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "We got a problem," Silas announced. "Another 5 head of cattle missing from the north pasture. That makes 20 this month alone." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 20 head was a serious loss, serious enough to bring scrutiny from the main house, serious enough to threaten Silas's position. "I've been patient," Silas's voice rose. "I've been giving folks the benefit of the doubt, but patience has its limits." His eyes swept the crowd and landed on Hannah. "Pierce, step forward." Hannah's face went pale, but she moved through the crowd with her chin held high. She stopped in front of Silas and waited. "You were assigned to the north pasture last Tuesday," Silas said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Same day 5 head went missing. Mighty convenient coincidence, don't you think?" "I was there doing the job you assigned me," Hannah said evenly. "I didn't touch any cattle." "That's what your daddy said too, right before they found Hollister's stock in his wagon." A gasp went through the crowd. Even by Silas's standards, that was cruel. My father was innocent. Hannah's voice shook, but she didn't back down. And so am I. Prove it. How? How do I prove I didn't do something I didn't do? Silas smiled. It was an ugly expression. That's your problem, ain't it? He turned to address the crowd. Until further notice, Pierce is confined to the women's quarters after work hours. Anyone caught talking to her will be assumed to be her accomplice. Anyone helping her will share her punishment. Caleb's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Silas wasn't done. And since we clearly can't trust her with real work, she'll be cleaning the latrines for the foreseeable future. Maybe that'll teach her something about honesty. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous laughter, the kind that people use when they're terrified of being the next target. Hannah stood perfectly still, her face a mask of stone. But Caleb could see her hands trembling at her sides. That's not fair. The words were out before Caleb could stop them. The crowd went silent. Every head turned toward him. Silas's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Caleb stepped forward. His heart was pounding, but his voice came out steady. I said that's not fair. You got no proof she took those cattle. No witnesses. Nothing but accusations. And who the hell are you to question me? Just a man with eyes and ears. I've been here a week and I ain't seen Hannah Pierce do one dishonest thing. What I have seen is her working harder than anyone else, getting punished for helping others, and taking every bit of cruelty you dish out without complaint. Silas's face reddened. You got a lot of nerve, Crawford, defending a thief's daughter when you ain't even been here long enough to know which end of a hoe to hold. I know enough. The crowd held its breath. Silas took a step toward Caleb, close enough that Caleb could smell the tobacco on his breath. You want to share her punishment? Is that it? You want to clean latrines and lose your rations too? Every instinct screamed at Caleb to back down. He was supposed to be gathering evidence, staying invisible, not drawing attention to himself. If he pushed too hard, Silas might start asking questions about the mysterious drifter who seemed awfully invested in one particular worker. But Hannah was looking at him now. Her eyes held a desperate, disbelieving hope that cut him deeper than any threat. If that's what it takes, Caleb said. Silas stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. Fine. You want to be a hero? You got it. Both of you latrines starting now. And Crawford? Silas leaned in close. I'll be watching you. Real close. He walked away, and the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Caleb and Hannah standing alone. You shouldn't have done that. Hannah's voice was barely above a whisper. Probably not. He'll make your life miserable now. It wasn't exactly paradise before. Hannah shook her head, but her eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously close to tears. Why would you do that for me? Caleb wanted to tell her. The truth was burning in his chest, demanding release. He wanted to say that he wasn't Michael Crawford, that he was Caleb Weston, that he owned every inch of this land, and could fire Silas Monroe with a single word. But if he told her now, she'd never believe that his feelings were real. She'd think he was just another powerful man playing games with people's lives. So he gave her the only truth he could. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner, he said. Even if it's just a fool who doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. Hannah stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something Caleb had never seen her do. She laughed. It wasn't a big laugh, just a small, surprised sound that escaped before she could stop it. But it transformed her face, made her look younger and lighter and impossibly beautiful. Michael Crawford, she said, shaking her head. You are the strangest man I ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. Take it however you want. She started walking toward the latrines, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. You coming, partner? Partner. The word wrapped around Caleb's heart and squeezed. Right behind you, he said. The latrine duty was every bit as miserable as Silas intended. The smell alone was enough to make a man reconsider his life choices. But working alongside Hannah, sharing the labor and the silence and the occasional quiet conversation, Caleb found he didn't mind. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said on the second day, as they scrubbed wooden planks in the afternoon heat. "Go ahead." "That woman who hurt you, the one who called you a brute, what happened after?" Caleb paused his scrubbing. "I broke off the engagement. Let people say whatever they wanted about me. Didn't have the heart to defend myself." "You were engaged. Nearly married. Invitations already sent, guests already traveling. I called it off 3 days before the ceremony." Hannah let out a low whistle. "That must have caused quite a scandal." "You could say that. But you didn't tell anyone what she said, what she really was. What would have been the point? She'd already destroyed what mattered. My faith in people. My belief that anyone could love me for myself." Caleb resumed scrubbing harder than necessary. "Every woman after that, I couldn't help wondering what they really saw when they looked at me. If they were just better at hiding what they wanted." "So you stopped letting anyone close? Seems safer that way." Hannah was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over his, stilling his frantic scrubbing. "I know what that feels like," she said softly. "Building walls so high you forget what it was like to live without them." Caleb looked at her hand on his. Her fingers were rough and worn, the nails cut short, nothing like the soft manicured hands of the women in San Antonio. But her touch sent warmth spreading through him like whiskey on a cold night. "My walls are pretty high," he admitted. "So are mine." "Maybe—" He stopped, afraid to finish the thought. "Maybe what?" "Maybe two people with high walls don't need to tear them down. Maybe they just need to build a door." Hannah's breath caught. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable showed in her eyes, something that matched the aching hope in Caleb's chest. Then footsteps approached, and she pulled her hand away quickly. It was Daisy May, one of the younger workers, who'd been friendly to Hannah despite the risks. She was breathless and pale. "Hannah, you need to come quick." "What is it?" "It's Ezra. He collapsed in the field. They're saying—" Daisy's voice cracked. "They're saying his heart gave out." Hannah was moving before Daisy finished speaking, and Caleb was right behind her. They found Ezra lying in the shade of a water barrel surrounded by a small group of workers who looked more curious than concerned. His face was gray, his breathing shallow, and his eyes were closed. Hannah dropped to her knees beside him. "Ezra, Ezra, can you hear me?" The old man's eyes fluttered open. He focused on Hannah with difficulty, then managed a weak smile. "There's my girl," he rasped. "Thought I might not get to say goodbye." "Don't talk like that. You're gonna be fine." "Don't lie to an old man, Hannah. I know what this is." Ezra's hand found hers and gripped it weakly. "Listen to me. There's something I should have told you years ago, about your daddy." Hannah leaned closer. "What about him?" "He came to me, the night before they arrested him, said he'd found proof, documents, something that showed the real thieves, the ones who'd been stealing from the ranches for years and blaming it on small folk." Where's the proof?" Ezra's breathing grew more labored. "He hid it. Said he couldn't trust anyone, not even the law. Said the corruption went too high." "Ezra, where did he hide it?" "The old oak, East Ridge. There's a hollow." Ezra coughed, a terrible rattling sound. "Thomas said if anything happened to him to tell you. But I was scared. Scared they'd come for me too. I'm sorry, Hannah. I'm so sorry." It's okay, Ezra. Just rest now." But Ezra's grip tightened on her hand. His eyes moved past Hannah to Caleb, and something flickered in them, a recognition that made Caleb's blood run cold. "You," Ezra breathed. "I knew there was something. Take care of her. She's got more enemies than she knows." His hand went slack. Hannah made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, and Caleb put his arm around her shoulders without thinking. She didn't pull away. Silas arrived moments later, took one look at the scene, and started barking orders. The body needed to be moved. Work needed to continue. There was no time for sentimentality. But as workers lifted Ezra's body and carried it away, Caleb's mind was racing. Documents hidden in a hollow oak on the East Ridge. Proof of a conspiracy that had destroyed an innocent man's life. Proof that might point directly at Wade Hollister, the man who wanted Caleb to marry his daughter. And Ezra's final words, his recognition of something in Caleb that shouldn't have been visible. I knew there was something. How much had the old man figured out? And more importantly, had he told anyone else that night? Caleb couldn't sleep. He waited until the bunkhouse was filled with snores, then slipped out into the darkness. The East Ridge was a 30-minute walk, and every step felt like a betrayal. He should tell Hannah. He should bring her with him. But if the documents proved what he suspected, they would implicate not just Hollister, but possibly people connected to his own family. George handled the legal affairs. George had been the one to recommend Silas for the foreman position years ago. George kept pushing the Hollister marriage, despite knowing how Caleb felt. What if George was involved? The thought made Caleb sick, but he couldn't ignore it. He found the old oak tree silhouetted against the stars. Its trunk was massive, the kind of tree that had been standing when the first settlers arrived. Caleb ran his hands along the bark, searching for irregularities. There. A knothole about shoulder height, barely visible in the darkness. He reached inside and felt his fingers touch leather. A small pouch hidden deep in the hollow. Caleb pulled it out with trembling hands. Inside were papers yellowed and brittle, but still legible in the moonlight. Transport manifests. Payment records. A letter in handwriting he didn't recognize. He couldn't read the details in the dark, but he saw enough. Names, dates, amounts. And at the bottom of one page, a signature that made his heart stop. George Weston. His brother's name on a document that seemed to authorize the theft of cattle that Thomas Pierce had been blamed for. Caleb stood in the darkness, his world crumbling around him, and understood that nothing would ever be the same. He wasn't just hiding from his identity anymore. He was hiding from his family's sins. Caleb made it back to the bunkhouse just before dawn, the leather pouch burning against his chest like a brand. He hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw George's signature on those documents, neat and precise. The handwriting of a man who kept meticulous records of his crimes. His own brother. The man who'd helped raise him after their mother died. The man who'd managed the family's legal affairs for 15 years. The man who'd been pushing him toward marriage with Wade Hollister's daughter. Now it all made terrible sense. George wasn't just trying to expand the family fortune. He was trying to bind Caleb to Hollister permanently, to create an alliance so tight that the truth could never come out. If Caleb married Amelia, he'd be family. He'd have no reason to dig into old cattle thefts. No reason to question why an innocent man died in prison. The work bell clanged and Caleb forced himself to move through the motions. Get dressed. Join the others. Pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Hannah found him at mid-morning, her face drawn with grief, and something else, determination. "You were gone last night," she said quietly, falling into step beside him. Caleb's heart stuttered. "What?" "I couldn't sleep after Ezra. Went for a walk. Saw you heading toward the East Ridge." Her eyes searched his face. "What were you looking for, Michael?" He should lie. He should make up something about needing fresh air, about clearing his head. That's what the old Caleb would have done. But he was tired of lies. "Ezra told you about the proof your father hid," he said. "I went to find it." Hannah stopped walking. Her whole body went rigid. "You found it?" "Yes." "Where is it? What does it say?" Caleb glanced around. Workers were everywhere, and Silas had eyes in places you'd never expect. "Not here, tonight. Meet me at the creek after everyone's asleep." Hannah grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Tell me now. I've waited 3 years to clear my father's name. I can't wait another minute." You have to. If Silas sees us talking too long, he'll get suspicious. And what I found? Caleb's voice dropped to barely a whisper. It's bigger than your father, Hannah. There are powerful people involved. People who'd kill to keep this quiet. Fear flickered in Hannah's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by steel. I ain't afraid of powerful people. I know you ain't. That's what worries me. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Tonight. The creek. Don't be late. She walked away before he could respond. The day dragged on like a wounded animal. Every hour felt like 3. Every time Silas rode past, Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. The foreman had been watching him more closely since the confrontation, looking for weakness, looking for an excuse. At dinner, Daisy May slid onto the bench next to Caleb with a nervous glance over her shoulder. You need to be careful, she whispered. About what? Silas has been asking questions about you. Where you came from. Why you don't talk about your past. Why you're so interested in Hannah. Caleb's blood went cold. What kind of questions? The kind that make people disappear. Daisy's voice trembled. Last year there was a man named Porter. Started asking too many questions about the missing supplies. One morning he was just gone. Silas said he quit in the middle of the night, but nobody believed it. What do you think happened? Daisy didn't answer. She didn't have to. Why are you telling me this? Caleb asked. Because you're the first person in a long time who's been kind to Hannah. And because... Daisy hesitated. Because I think you're not who you say you are. Every muscle in Caleb's body tensed. What makes you say that? The way you carry yourself. The way you talk when you forget to sound common. The way you looked at Silas that day like you had the authority to fire him yourself. Daisy's eyes met his. I don't know who you really are, Michael Crawford, but I know you ain't just a drifter looking for work. If I told you the truth, would you keep it quiet? Depends on what the truth is. Caleb studied her face, this young woman who had risked her position to befriend Hannah, who was now risking it again, to warn a man she barely knew. The truth is, I'm trying to help, he said carefully. But the people I'm up against are dangerous, and the more you know, the more danger you're in. Daisy was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. I believe you. Just please, don't let them hurt Hannah. She's the closest thing I got to a sister. I won't. The night was moonless and thick with heat when Caleb crept out of the bunkhouse. Hannah was already waiting by the creek, a dark silhouette against the slightly lighter darkness of the water. She turned at his approach, her body tense with anticipation. Show me. Caleb pulled the leather pouch from inside his shirt and handed it to her. Hannah's hands shook as she opened it. She moved closer to the water, using what little starlight there was to read the documents. The silence stretched on. Caleb watched her face, watched the emotions play across it like shadows. Confusion, then understanding, then horror, then rage. These are transport manifests, she said, her voice strangled. My father's routes. But the numbers are wrong. The cattle counts don't match what he was actually hauling. Someone was adding extra head to the official records, stealing from Hollister and other ranchers, using your father's routes to move them. And blaming him when it went wrong. Hannah's voice cracked. They used him. They used his honest reputation to cover their crimes, and when things got too risky, they made him the scapegoat. There's more. Hannah looked up. What? The signature on the authorization documents. Caleb forced the words out. The man who approved the false manifests. It wasn't just Wade Hollister. Who else? The question hung in the air. Caleb felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into darkness. George Weston. Hannah frowned. Who's George Weston? He's the legal administrator for the biggest ranch in the territory. Caleb's throat tightened. Lone Star Ranch. He manages all the contracts, all the business dealings. Nothing happens without his signature. So this George Weston and Wade Hollister worked together to frame my father. Yes. Hannah stared at him, and slowly her expression changed. The grief and rage were still there, but now suspicion was creeping in. "How do you know so much about the Weston family's business?" Caleb's heart stopped. "How do you know who manages their contracts, who approves their dealings?" Hannah stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. "You've been here 2 weeks, Michael. You work the fields like the rest of us, but you know things a drifter couldn't possibly know." "Hannah, who are you?" The words hit him like physical blows. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading since that first day she handed him water in the field. The moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. "My name isn't Michael Crawford." Hannah's face went pale. "What? My real name is Caleb. Caleb Weston." He forced himself to hold her gaze. "I own Lone Star Ranch. Every acre of it. George is my brother." For a long moment, Hannah didn't move, didn't speak, didn't seem to breathe. Then she stepped back, and the look on her face was worse than anything Caleb had imagined. "You're the owner." Her voice was flat dead. "You've been lying to me this whole time. I wanted to tell you. But you didn't. You let me think you were like me. Poor. Struggling. Someone who understood what it felt like to have nothing." Her voice rose. "You watched me cry about my father. You held my hand when Ezra died. And the whole time you knew. You knew your family was responsible. I didn't know about George. I swear I didn't know until last night." "And that's supposed to make it better." Tears were streaming down Hannah's face now, but her voice was pure fury. "Your brother destroyed my life. Your brother killed my father. And you came here what to play at being poor, to see how the other half lives." "No. I came here because I was broken. Because a woman I loved told me I was nothing but dirt and money, and I wanted to find out if anyone could ever love just the dirt. So I was an experiment, a test. You were the first person in 2 years who made me feel human again." Caleb's voice broke. "Hannah, please. I know I should have told you. I know I was wrong. But everything I felt, everything between us, that wasn't a lie." Hannah shook her head slowly. "I trusted you. For the first time since my daddy died, I actually trusted someone." She held up the documents with trembling hands. "And now I find out you're one of them. One of the people who destroyed my family. I'm not like them. I'm going to make this right." "How? By firing Silas? By telling the sheriff what you found?" Hannah laughed bitterly. "You think I haven't dreamed of justice for 3 years, the sheriff's in Hollister's pocket, the judge's too. Your brother probably makes sure of that. Then we go higher. We take this to the newspapers, to the state authorities. We..." Hannah's eyes flashed. "There is no we. There never was. Michael Crawford was a lie. Caleb Weston is the brother of the man who killed my father." She turned to walk away. "Hannah, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I know you hate me right now. I know you have every right to never speak to me again." Caleb's voice was raw. "But those documents prove your father was innocent. Whatever you feel about me, take them. Clear his name. That's all that matters." Hannah stood motionless for what felt like eternity. Then she turned, walked back to him, and took the documents from his outstretched hand. Their fingers brushed, and Caleb felt the contact like a lightning strike. "I'm taking these because my father deserves justice," she said. "Not because I forgive you. Not because I trust you. Not because any of this changes what you did. I understand." "No, you don't." Her voice softened just slightly, and somehow that was worse than the anger. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything and finally find something good only to discover it was built on lies. You don't understand what it's like to be me." She walked away into the darkness, and Caleb let her go. He stood by the creek alone, the stars wheeling overhead, and felt the last piece of his heart crack and fall away. The next morning, Silas Monroe gathered the workers in the yard, with a look on his face that made Caleb's blood run cold. "We got ourselves a situation," the foreman announced. "Seems like someone's been sneaking around at night, going places they shouldn't go, doing things they shouldn't do." His eyes swept the crowd and landed on Caleb. "Crawford, step forward." Caleb moved through the silent workers, his mind racing. Had someone seen him last night? Had Silas found out about the documents? "One of my men saw you leaving the bunkhouse after dark," Silas said. "Care to explain where you went?" "Couldn't sleep. Went for a walk." "A walk? In the middle of the night, to the East Ridge?" Caleb's stomach dropped. That's the same ridge where old Ezra talked about hidden documents right before he died. Silas stepped closer, close enough that Caleb could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Funny coincidence, ain't it? I don't know anything about any documents." "No, then you won't mind if I search your things." It wasn't a question. Caleb kept his face neutral as two of Silas's men headed toward the bunkhouse. The documents weren't there, Hannah had them, but the relief was short-lived. If Silas was this suspicious, it meant someone was feeding him information. "Who told you?" Caleb asked quietly. Silas smiled. "Told me what?" "That you've been paying too much attention to the Pierce girl. That you're asking questions about cattle that went missing years before you got here. That you don't move like a man who's worked fields his whole life. None of that's a crime." "No, but lying to your employer is." Silas's smile widened. "I sent a telegram to the address on your letter of recommendation. Funny thing, nobody there ever heard of Michael Crawford." Caleb felt the trap closing around him. "Who are you really?" Silas demanded. "Who sent you here? Was it Hollister? Is he trying to pin something on me?" The accusation was so absurd that Caleb almost laughed. But there was genuine fear beneath Silas's anger, the fear of a man who knew his crimes were finally catching up with him. "I already told you who I am." "Then you're a liar and a sneak." Silas raised his voice for the crowd. "And we all know what happens to liars and sneaks on this ranch. You gonna fire me? Go ahead." "Fire you?" Silas shook his head slowly. "No. I'm gonna give you exactly what you've been asking for. Double shifts, half rations. And since you're so fond of the Pierce girl, you can share her punishment. Both of you confined to quarters after dark. Both of you under watch at all times." Caleb clenched his jaw. "And if I refuse? Then I'll send for the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing and theft. I'm sure I can find something in your belongings that don't belong to you." Silas smiled. "Your choice." It wasn't really a choice at all. Hannah avoided him for 3 days. She worked her section without looking up, ate her meals alone, and disappeared into the women's quarters the moment work ended. When Caleb tried to approach her, she simply walked away. On the 4th day, Ruth Weston rode into the workers' compound. Caleb saw her before she saw him, his sister on horseback, her riding clothes out of place among the dusty workers. His heart nearly stopped. "I'm looking for a man named Crawford," Ruth announced loudly. "Anyone know where I can find him?" Every eye turned to Caleb. Ruth's gaze found him, and for a moment her composure cracked. She looked horrified at his appearance. The gaunt face, the rough clothes, the calluses on his hands. But she recovered quickly. "Crawford, a word." She dismounted and walked toward the edge of the compound, away from listening ears. Caleb followed, acutely aware of Silas watching from a distance. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. "Saving your fool hide." Ruth kept her voice low. "George knows. Knows what? Everything. That you're here, that you're poking around in old records, that you found something in that oak tree." Ruth's face was pale. "He came to the house last night drunk and ranting. Said you were going to destroy everything our father built. Said he had to stop you before it was too late." Caleb's blood went cold. "How did he know about the oak tree?" "I don't know. But Caleb—" Ruth grabbed his arm. "He's coming. He sent a message to Wade Hollister, and they're both coming here tomorrow. George said something about ending this once and for all." "Hannah has the documents." "Then you need to get them somewhere safe. Tonight." before George can destroy them. She won't talk to me. She found out who I really am. Ruth closed her eyes briefly. Then you better find a way to make her listen. Because if George gets those papers, your friend's father will stay a convicted thief forever. And I'm guessing that girl will never forgive you. She mounted her horse and looked down at him with an expression that was equal parts love and exasperation. Fix this, Caleb, whatever it takes. She rode away, leaving Caleb standing in the dust with one day to save everything that mattered. Caleb found Hannah in the last place he expected. She was kneeling beside the old mare in the back pasture, the same sick horse nobody else bothered with applying herbs to its wounded leg, with the same gentle patience she'd shown before. Hannah? She didn't look up. Go away. I can't. George is coming. Tomorrow. He knows about the documents. Her hands stilled on the horse's leg. He's bringing Wade Hollister with him. They're going to destroy those papers and bury the truth forever. Hannah finally turned to face him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set with stubborn determination. Then let them come. You don't understand. These men killed your father. They won't hesitate to what, kill me too? Hannah stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. I've been dead for 3 years, Caleb. The moment they took my daddy, the moment my mama stopped breathing, everything good in my life ended. What more can they take? Your life. Your actual life. Is that worth living without justice? The question hung between them, sharp and painful. It could be, Caleb said quietly, if you let it. Hannah's laugh was bitter. Easy words from a man who owns 10,000 acres and never had to wonder where his next meal was coming from. I'm not that man right now. Right now, I'm just someone who... He stopped, swallowed hard. Someone who can't stand the thought of losing you. Something flickered in Hannah's eyes. Pain, longing, the desperate hope she'd been trying to kill. You already lost me. The night you told me who you really are. Did I? Caleb stepped closer. Then why does it hurt so much when you look at me like that? Why can't you just walk away and forget I exist? Because I'm a fool. Her voice cracked. Because for a few weeks I actually believed that something good could happen to someone like me. That I could find someone who saw me, really saw me, and wanted me anyway. I do see you. I do want you. You lied to me. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. But right now, we don't have time for regrets. We have until tomorrow morning to figure out how to save those documents and clear your father's name. Hannah was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Why do you care so much? Your brother is one of the criminals. Exposing him will destroy your family's reputation. Some things matter more than reputation. Like what? Like you. The words came out before Caleb could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. Hannah's breath caught. For a moment, the wall between them seemed to waver. Then she shook her head. I hid the documents somewhere safe, somewhere nobody will find them. Where? Why should I tell you? How do I know you won't hand them over to your brother? The accusation stung, but Caleb understood it. You don't know. You have no reason to trust me. All I can do is ask you to take a chance. He held out his hand. One more chance. That's all I'm asking. Hannah stared at his outstretched hand like it might bite her. And if I say no, then I'll find another way to stop George. With or without your help. Why? Why risk everything for a woman who can't even say your name without wanting to scream? Because you're the only person who ever made me feel like I was worth more than my land. Caleb's voice broke. Because when you handed me that cup of water on my first day, you didn't see Caleb Weston, or 10,000 acres, or the Weston family fortune. You just saw a man who was dying of thirst, and you helped him anyway. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks. That man doesn't exist. You made him up. No, that man is more real than any version of me I've ever been. Michael Crawford was the first honest thing about me in years. Hannah made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. You are the most infuriating person I've ever met. I've been told, She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, and reached out to take his hand. The contact sent electricity through Caleb's entire body. "The documents are buried under the floor of the old storage shed," Hannah said. "The one nobody uses anymore. Third board from the left wall." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive tomorrow." They made their plan in whispered conversations, stolen between work assignments. Daisy May agreed to serve as lookout, watching for George's arrival. Martha, contacted through Ruth, promised to delay the visitors at the main house as long as possible. Even a few of the workers who'd seen Silas's cruelty firsthand agreed to create distractions if needed. It wasn't much of an army, but it was what they had. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the darkness, playing through scenarios in his mind. What would George do when confronted with the evidence? Would he deny everything? Try to destroy the papers? Turn violent? Caleb knew his brother better than anyone. George was calculating, not impulsive. He'd try to negotiate, first try to find a way out that preserved his reputation, but if that failed... The sound of footsteps outside the bunkhouse made Caleb freeze. Heavy boots, more than one person. He eased off his cot and moved silently to the window. 3 figures were crossing the compound in the moonlight, heading toward the women's quarters. Silas. And 2 men Caleb didn't recognize. His blood went cold. He slipped out of the bunkhouse and followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. The men stopped at the door of the women's quarters, and Silas pounded on the wood. "Pierce, get out here!" Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. The door opened, and Hannah appeared, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale in the moonlight. "What do you want?" "Mr. Hollister arrived early." Silas's smile was predatory. "Seems he's real eager to have a conversation with you." "It's the middle of the night." "Rich men don't care about time." Silas grabbed her arm. "Now move." Caleb stepped out of the shadows. "Let her go." Every head turned toward him. Silas's eyes narrowed. "Crawford, should have known you'd stick your nose in this." "I said let her go." "Or what, you gonna fight all 3 of us?" Silas laughed. "Be my guest." Caleb moved forward anyway. One of the other men pulled a pistol. "Don't be stupid, friend. Mr. Hollister just wants to talk. Nobody needs to get hurt." "Then why bring guns?" "Insurance." The man gestured with the weapon. "Now you can either come along peaceful-like, or you can bleed out in the dirt. Your choice." Hannah's eyes met Caleb's. In them, he saw fear, but also a fierce determination that made his chest ache. "It's all right," she said quietly. "Let's just see what they want." "Hannah, I've been waiting 3 years for this, Caleb. Whatever happens tonight, at least I'll finally face the men who destroyed my family." They were marched across the compound and up the long trail toward the main house. Caleb had walked this path twice before, once going down disguised as a nobody, and once in his dreams, imagining the moment he'd return as himself. He'd never imagined it would be like this at gunpoint, with the woman he loved at his side, and his brother waiting to destroy them both. The main house blazed with lamplight. Wade Hollister was waiting on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was a big man, prosperous and cruel-looking, with small eyes that missed nothing. And beside him stood George. Caleb's brother looked older, somehow worn down by whatever secrets he'd been carrying. When he saw Caleb, something flickered across his face. Guilt, fear, relief. "So it's true," George said quietly. "You actually did it. You actually went down there and lived like a common laborer." "Hello, George. Do you have any idea what you've done? The chaos you've caused?" "I've caused?" Caleb felt his temper rising. "I'm not the one who forged documents and framed an innocent man." George's face went pale. "Keep your voice down." "Why afraid someone might hear the truth?" Wade Hollister stepped forward, his expression hard. "Mr. Weston, the real Mr. Weston, I suggest you remember who you're dealing with. I've bought judges, sheriffs, and politicians in 4 counties. Whatever you think you know, I can make it disappear. Like you made Thomas Pierce disappear. Hollister's eyes flickered to Hannah, who stood rigid beside Caleb. Ah, the thief's daughter. His voice dripped with contempt. I should have known you were behind this, filling this fool's head with lies about your criminal father. My father was no criminal. Hannah's voice was steady despite her trembling hands. And we both know it. Do we? Because I have signed confessions, witness statements, and a court verdict that say otherwise. Confessions you bought, witnesses you bribed, a verdict you paid for. Hollister smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Caleb had ever seen. Prove it. The silence that followed was suffocating. George stepped between them, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. This doesn't have to be unpleasant. Caleb, I know you think you've found something damning, but those documents can be interpreted many ways. Work with me here. Marry Amelia, combine our family's interests, and this whole unfortunate business can be forgotten. Forgotten. Caleb stared at his brother. A man died in prison. His wife died of grief. Their daughter has been living like an outcast for 3 years. And you want me to just forget? I want you to be practical. Think about the family. Think about what Father built. Father would be ashamed of what you've done. The words hit George like a physical blow. His composure cracked, and for a moment, Caleb saw the scared little boy who used to climb into his bed during thunderstorms. You don't know what I've done, George whispered. You don't know what I've had to do to keep this family together. Then tell me. George glanced at Hollister, then back at Caleb. Not here. Not like this. No more secrets, George. No more lies. Tell me the truth right now, or I swear I'll drag every document you've ever signed into the public square. Something broke in George's expression. I didn't have a choice. His voice cracked. After Father died, the ranch was drowning in debt. He'd made bad investments, taken loans against the property. I was going to lose everything. Everything he'd built. Everything our mother loved. So you started stealing? I started surviving. George's voice rose. Hollister offered me a deal. Help him move cattle through our routes, take a percentage, keep my mouth shut. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. But it did hurt someone. Thomas Pierce found out, didn't he? George's silence was answer enough. Hannah stepped forward, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. My father discovered what you were doing. He was going to report it. So you framed him. It wasn't supposed to go that far. George's eyes were wild now. We just wanted to discredit him, make sure no one believed his accusations. But Hollister, shut up. Hollister's voice cut through like a whip. You've said enough. No. He hasn't said nearly enough. Caleb moved to stand beside Hannah. What happened after the arrest? George, what did Hollister do? George looked at the ground. Tell me. The guards. George's voice was barely a whisper. Hollister paid the guards to make sure Pierce never made it to trial. Hannah made a sound like a wounded animal. They beat him. George continued, tears streaming down his face. Every day. Said he tried to escape. Said he attacked them. By the time the fever took him, there was nothing left to save. Caleb felt Hannah sway beside him. He caught her arm, held her steady. My father, she breathed. They tortured him. They murdered him. And you knew. Caleb stared at his brother. You knew this whole time and you never said a word. I was afraid. I'm still afraid. George looked at Hollister with naked terror. You don't cross this man and survive. I've seen what happens to people who try. Hollister laughed. Finally. Some honesty. He set down his whiskey glass and moved closer. You've heard the truth, Weston. Your brother is a coward and a criminal. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to make sure you both pay for what you did. With what evidence George will deny everything he just said? There were no witnesses, except the 4 of us. And I don't think Miss Pierce here will live long enough to testify. Caleb moved in front of Hannah without thinking. You'll have to go through me. That can be arranged. Can it? A new voice cut through the tension. I reckon that might be harder than you think. Everyone turned. Silas Monroe stood in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were a dozen workers, men and women, who'd been watching from the shadows, who'd followed their foreman up the hill and heard every word. And in front of them all stood Daisy May, holding a lantern high. We heard everything, she said. Every confession, every threat. Hollister's face twisted with rage. Silas, what is this? Get these people out of here. But Silas didn't move. I've worked for men like you my whole life, the foreman said slowly. Took their money, did their dirty work, told myself it was just business. But I watched that girl's father die. I watched her mother waste away. And I ain't gonna watch them hurt her too. You're a fool, Hollister snarled. All of you. Do you think testimony from ranch hands will hold up against my lawyers? Maybe not. Caleb stepped forward, and this time he wasn't pretending to be anyone but himself. But testimony from the owner of Lone Star Ranch might carry some weight, especially when backed up by original documents with your signature all over them. Hollister's face went white. That's right. Caleb's voice rang with authority. I've got everything. Transport manifests, payment records, the letter you wrote to George authorizing the frame-up. It's all going to the state authorities first thing in the morning. You wouldn't dare. Your own brother. My brother will face justice for his crimes. So will you. George let out a broken sound. Caleb, please. Don't. Caleb's voice cracked. Don't you dare ask me for mercy when you showed none to an innocent man. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Hollister moved. He was faster than his bulk suggested, pulling a pistol from inside his coat and pressing it against Hannah's temple before anyone could react. Nobody moves. Or she dies. Caleb's heart stopped. Let her go. I don't think so. This is how it's going to work. You're going to give me those documents. Then you're going to forget everything you heard tonight. And if you're very, very good, I might let this little thief's daughter live. My father wasn't a thief. Hannah's voice was steady, despite the gun against her head. And neither am I. Shut up. He was a good man, an honest man. And no matter what you do to me, that truth will come out. You can't kill everyone. You can't silence everyone. Someday, somehow the world will know what you did. The only thing the world will know is that you died trying to steal from my ranch. Hollister cocked the pistol. Just like your father. No. The word came from George. He stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Wade, let her go. Stay out of this. I can't. I've stayed out of too much for too long. George's voice strengthened. I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done being your accomplice. Whatever happens next, I won't have more blood on my hands. You spineless... George lunged. The gun went off. Hannah screamed. And Caleb caught his brother as he fell. Blood spread across George's shirt like a blooming flower. Caleb pressed his hands against the wound, trying to stop the flow, but it seeped through his fingers anyway. George, stay with me. His brother's eyes fluttered open. A weak smile crossed his pale face. Didn't think I had it in me, did you? Don't talk. Save your strength. Been saving my strength for years. Look where it got me. George coughed, and blood flecked his lips. I'm sorry, Caleb. For everything. For the lies. For the cowardice. For letting you think Father left us in good standing when I'd been cleaning up his messes since before he died. We'll talk about it later. After the doctor, there won't be a later. George's hand found Caleb's and gripped it with surprising strength. Listen to me. The safe in my office. Behind the painting of Mother. Everything's there. Every document. Every record. I kept copies of everything because I knew someday it would come to this. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I was ashamed. Because I wanted you to keep believing our father was a good man. Because... George's voice broke. Because you were the one good thing about this family, and I couldn't bear to watch you look at me the way you're looking at me now." Tears streamed down Caleb's face. "I don't hate you, George." "You should. You're my brother. Nothing changes that." George's grip weakened. His eyes drifted past Caleb to something only he could see. "Tell Ruth I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to be the man Father wanted me to be. I just wasn't strong enough." "Tell her yourself. You're going to be fine." But even as the words left his mouth, Caleb felt his brother's hand go slack. "George, George." The workers surrounded them now. Someone shouting for a doctor, someone else trying to restrain Hollister, who stood frozen with the smoking gun still in his hand. Hannah knelt beside Caleb, her face wet with tears. "He saved my life," she whispered. "He barely knew me, and he saved my life." "He knew enough." Caleb's voice cracked. "He knew what was right. In the end, that's what mattered." Martha arrived with bandages and medical supplies, pushing through the crowd with the authority of a woman who had seen too many emergencies to be slowed by shock. "Move aside. Let me see him." She worked quickly, pressing cloth against the wound, checking George's pulse. "He's alive," she announced. "Barely. The bullet missed his heart, but he's lost a lot of blood. We need to get him to a real doctor, and we need to do it now." Hope surged through Caleb's chest. "The wagon. Someone get the wagon ready." Workers scattered to follow his orders, responding instinctively to the authority in his voice. Hollister tried to bolt. Silas caught him by the collar and threw him to the ground. "You ain't going nowhere." "Do you know who I am? Do you know what I can do to you?" "I know exactly who you are." Silas's voice was cold. "You're the man who murdered Thomas Pierce. You're the man who just shot an unarmed man in front of a dozen witnesses, and you're the man who's going to hang for it." Hollister's face twisted with desperation. "I'll pay you. Whatever you want. Name your price." "There ain't enough money in the world to buy what you're selling." Silas looked up at the workers who had gathered around them. "Tie him up. Someone ride to town and fetch the sheriff." "The sheriff works for me." "Then I reckon we'll have to find one who doesn't." They loaded George onto the wagon as gently as possible. Caleb climbed up beside him, refusing to leave his brother's side. Hannah appeared at the edge of the wagon. "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her eyes held his. "Whatever happened between us, your brother took a bullet meant for me. I owe him my life. The least I can do is help save his." The ride to town took forever and not long enough. George drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling fragments of confession and apology. Caleb held his hand and prayed for the first time since his mother's funeral. Hannah sat across from them, applying pressure to the wound whenever Martha's bandages soaked through. "He really didn't know," she said quietly, "about what Hollister did to my father in prison. You could see it in his face when he confessed." "Does that make it better?" "No, but it makes him human." Hannah's voice was soft. "He was weak. He made terrible choices, but in the end he chose to do the right thing. That has to count for something." "I don't know what it counts for. I don't know what any of this counts for." "It counts for everything." Hannah reached across the space between them and took Caleb's free hand. "Your brother gave me back my father's name. Whatever else he did, I'll never forget that." The doctor in Silver Creek was an old man named Harrison, who had seen every kind of wound the frontier could produce. He worked on George for 3 hours, while Caleb paced the waiting room, and Hannah sat in silence, her hands clasped in her lap. When Harrison finally emerged, his face was grave, but not hopeless. "The bullet nicked an artery. Another inch to the left and he'd be dead. As it is, he's got a long recovery ahead of him, and I can't promise there won't be complications. But he'll live. God willing, he's asking for you." George looked smaller somehow, lying in the narrow bed with bandages wrapped around his chest. His face was gray, but his eyes were clear when Caleb entered. "Still here?" George rasped. "Yeah, still here." "Hollister." Being held by the workers until we can find an honest lawman. Ruth's already sent telegrams to the state authorities. By tomorrow, every newspaper in Texas will know what happened. George closed his eyes. Father would be so disappointed. Father made his own mistakes. You were just trying to fix them. I made them worse. So much worse. George's voice cracked. That girl's father, Thomas Pierce. He was a good man. I knew it even then. And I let Hollister destroy him because I was too afraid to stand up. You stood up tonight. Too little. Too late. Maybe. Or maybe it's exactly enough. Caleb leaned closer. You're going to face consequences for what you did. There's no avoiding that. But when it comes time to answer, I'll be there. I'll make sure everyone knows you tried to make things right. Why after everything? Because you're my brother. Because I remember the boy who used to read me stories when I couldn't sleep. Because I know that person is still in there somewhere buried under years of fear and bad choices. Caleb's voice strengthened. And because Hannah Pierce is the woman I love and she's already forgiven you. If she can do that, so can I. Tears slipped down George's cheeks. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Nobody deserves forgiveness. That's what makes it grace. The weeks that followed were chaos and clarity in equal measure. State authorities arrived to investigate Hollister's crimes, and the evidence Caleb provided was damning. Transport manifests, payment records, letters of authorization. Everything George had kept in his paranoid need for insurance painted a picture of systematic corruption that stretched back years. Thomas Pierce was exonerated posthumously. The governor himself issued a public statement clearing the man's name and condemning the conspiracy that had destroyed him. Hannah stood in the town square when they read the proclamation, tears streaming down her face as her father's honor was finally restored. Caleb stood beside her, not touching, not speaking, just present. When it was over, she turned to him. 3 years, she said quietly. 3 years I waited for someone to believe me. To believe him. I'm sorry it took so long. Don't be. If you hadn't come to the ranch, if you hadn't pretended to be someone else, none of this would have happened. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I hated you for that lie. Part of me still does. But I also understand why you did it. Does that mean you forgive me? Hannah was quiet for a long moment. It means I'm willing to try. The changes at Lone Star Ranch came gradually but steadily. Caleb fired Silas Monroe, but not before publicly acknowledging that the foreman had redeemed himself in the end. Silas accepted a position at a smaller ranch up north, a chance to start over without the weight of his past. Working conditions improved dramatically. Better food, better housing, fair wages, regular rest. Caleb walked the fields himself every week, talking with the workers, learning their names, understanding their struggles. Hannah stayed. Not as a worker, Caleb offered her a position managing the ranch's accounts, a job that suited her education and intelligence. She refused at first, too proud to accept what felt like charity. I don't need your pity, she told him flatly. I've survived this long without handouts. It's not pity. It's respect. You're the smartest person I know, and I need someone I can trust to make sure what happened with George never happens again. Caleb met her eyes. Please. Let me make this right. Hannah took the job. They worked together through the summer and into the fall, rebuilding the ranch's reputation and their own relationship one day at a time. There were setbacks, moments when the old hurt flared up, when Hannah couldn't look at him without seeing the lie he'd told. But there were also moments of connection that ran deeper than either of them expected. Like the evening she found him at the creek where they used to meet, staring at the water with a heaviness she recognized. You're thinking about George, she said, sitting beside him. The trial starts next week. They're going to send him to prison. He confessed to his part in the conspiracy, testified against Hollister. That has to count for something. It does. But he's still my brother. He's still the only family I have left besides Ruth. Caleb's voice broke. I keep wondering if I could have prevented all this. If I'd been paying more attention, if I'd questioned the account sooner. Stop, Hannah's voice was firm. "You can't spend your life carrying guilt for other people's choices. George made his decisions. Hollister made his. You made yours. The only thing you can control is what comes next." What if what comes next is more pain? Then you face it, same as you've faced everything else. Hannah reached out and took his hand. "But you don't have to face it alone." Caleb looked at their intertwined fingers, her rough hand and his rough hand, two people who had been broken by lies and were slowly learning to trust again. "I love you," he said. "I know I don't have the right to say that. I know I hurt you. But I need you to know that everything I feel is real. It was real when I was Michael Crawford, and it's real now." Hannah was quiet for so long that Caleb began to prepare himself for rejection. Then she leaned over and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative, the kind of kiss that asks a question rather than makes a statement. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, but I do." George's trial lasted 3 days. He testified against Hollister with a clarity and courage that surprised everyone, including himself. He named names, provided documents, explained the mechanics of the conspiracy in devastating detail. Hollister was convicted of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to hang. George received 5 years in prison, a sentence reduced for his cooperation and his attempt to save Hannah's life. Caleb was there when they led his brother away in chains. "I'll visit every month," Caleb promised. "And when you get out, there'll be a place for you here, if you want it." George shook his head slowly. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not, but you're my brother. And family means something even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." For the first time since the shooting, George smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. "Take care of her, Caleb. That woman is too good for either of us." "I know. I plan to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve her." The wedding took place on a cool October afternoon, 1 year after Caleb Weston walked into the workers' quarters wearing borrowed rags and a false name. It was a simple ceremony in the small valley church attended by workers and neighbors and the few friends who had stood by them through everything. Ruth served as Hannah's witness, having become more like a sister than a future sister-in-law over the months they'd spent working together. Daisy May cried through the entire service. Even Martha, who claimed she was too old for sentiment, had to dab her eyes with her apron. When Caleb slipped the ring onto Hannah's finger, his hands trembled. "I don't have fancy words," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not good at speeches or poetry or any of that. But I know what I feel. I know that you make me want to be better than I am. I know that every morning I wake up grateful you gave me a second chance. And I know that I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of your love." Hannah's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I didn't fall in love with fancy words," she replied. "I fell in love with a man who shared his bread when he had nothing, who stood up for me when everyone else looked away. Who saw me, really saw me, when the whole world treated me like I was invisible." Her voice strengthened. "You asked me once if I could love a man who had nothing but his soul. The answer is yes. The answer has always been yes." Their first son was born the following summer. They named him Thomas after the grandfather he would never meet, but whose legacy he would carry forward. Caleb held the baby in his arms and felt something he'd thought was lost forever: hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope for a future that looked nothing like the lonely existence he'd once accepted as inevitable. Hannah watched them from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He has your eyes," she said. "Poor kid." "I mean it. He's going to break hearts someday. Not if I have anything to say about it. He's going to be honest and kind and never take anything for granted. He's going to know that a man's worth isn't measured by his land or his money, but by how he treats the people around him." That's a lot of pressure for someone who's only been alive for 3 hours. "He'll grow into it." Caleb kissed his son's forehead gently. "He's got good blood on both sides." Hannah reached out and took Caleb's free hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" For being stubborn enough to disguise yourself as a poor man. For being foolish enough to fall in love with the one woman everyone told you to avoid. For being brave enough to choose truth over comfort. Her eyes glistened. My father died believing no one would ever know the truth about him. Because of you, his grandson will grow up knowing his grandfather was a hero. Caleb looked at his wife, at his son, at the life he'd built from the ashes of lies and betrayal. Your father was a hero, he said, and so are you. I just happened to be smart enough to recognize it. Years later, when Thomas was old enough to ask about his name, Caleb would tell him the whole story. He would tell him about a woman who shared her water with a stranger, about an old man who died protecting a secret, about a brother who made terrible mistakes but found redemption in his last act of courage. He would tell him about the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, not what the world says they should be. About the danger of judging others by circumstances beyond their control. About the power of forgiveness and the price of truth. And he would tell him about love, the kind that doesn't care about land or money or social standing. The kind that sees past masks and lies and finds the real person underneath. The kind that heals wounds and builds bridges and makes impossible things possible. Because that was the lesson Caleb Weston learned when he gave up everything to become nobody. The greatest wealth a man can possess isn't measured in acres or cattle or gold. It's measured in the hearts that choose to love him when he has nothing else to offer. And by that measure, Caleb Weston was the richest man in Texas.